And now to our AGM. We're delighted to be able to deliver a recap of the Jewish Foundation's 2020 year. I know all of us wished we could be holding the AGM as an in-person event this year. And for that matter, I wish that I could have had a haircut for today. But COVID and the necessary restrictions have made so many things we take for granted impossible. The good news is that the Zoom virtual platform does allow more members of our community to attend easily and from the comfort of your homes or offices, even your backyards, as I see. I've taken a look at the registration list for this evening's attendees, and I'm so happy to see such a healthy representation from our community organizations. Again, many, many thanks for taking the time to join us. Our first formal order of business will be the approval of the minutes of the 2020 Annual General Meeting of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba, held on June 17th, 2020. And I would ask for a motion, please, for the approval of the minutes of the 2020 AGM of the Jewish Foundation.
I so move.
Thank you, Stephen Hyman. May I have a seconder, please?
I'll second it, Richard.
Thanks, Jeff Norton. Are there any opposed? I see none. Motion carried. Thanks. It is now my pleasure to invite our CEO, John Diamond, to present his report. John?
Thank you, Richard. Good evening, Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending this year's annual general meeting. This past year has been an uphill battle and has presented the entire world with a multitude of unique challenges. But as Winston Churchill said, never let a good crisis go to waste. The day I arrived at the foundation, I began to take in the minutiae and inner workings of the JFM, how we interact with donors, invest and steward this significant community endowment, and perhaps most important aspect, our reason for existence, how we support, guide, and encourage our beloved Jewish community's growth and vitality. That period of acclimation was knocked into a completely new track when the full extent of the pandemic hit home and realization set in that we were dealing with something that none of us, board, staff, or community had ever encountered before. With so many organizations reeling, not knowing what to do next, we had every opportunity to do the same. Instead, we stepped forward, pushing back against the onset of uncertainty and expedited our emergency plan to disperse funds and embrace our entire community. Almost immediately, and with no questions asked, the JFM began distributing COVID-19 relief funds to organizations in our community affected by the pandemic. No matter the extent each Jewish charitable organization had been affected, it gave them all the needed reassurance that someone was there for them, that their foundation was there for them. While these immediate actions were being taken for our community, JFM staff were surmising new and creative ways to conduct the business of the JFM without pause. We are proud that there was never an interruption of service to our donors or recipient organizations. The function of the foundation never skipped a beat while staff moved to home workspaces, transitioned back to the office, and now once again back home. This year saw the hiring of 3 new staff members, each meeting the demands of learning their new positions, both remotely and during a time when there was required from all staff seemed to be changing by the minute. A year where we could not gather in person presented obstacles to all organizations that facilitate events. However, as was the case with the rest of our operations, we did not skip a beat. 6 more community members became Endowment Book of Life signers, joining over 800 other people who have stepped forward to share their stories and pledge to leave a bequest. With the pandemic causing us to shift, EBOL took on somewhat of a new life in the form of EBOL Week. The week saw each signer and their story featured in the Winnipeg Free Press and on social media for one day. The conduct of the JFM in 2020 set a benchmark for organizations in our community, reinforcing the trust and reliability that our brand represents. Our open lines of communication with Jewish organizations, including the Jewish Federation of Winnipeg, ensures that we have our finger on the pulse of developing need. We take a massive amount of pride in our donors' faith in us to steward this endowment, and over $3.8 million in contributed capital realized this year is a testament to that ongoing confidence. Thank you, and I return it now to Richard.
Thanks, John. I would now like to introduce Dan Blankstein. Dan is the treasurer of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba, and Dan chairs our Audit and Finance Committee and is going to deliver the 2020 financial report. Dan?
Thank you, Richard. To begin, I'd like to thank Ian Barnes, JFM CFO, and his team for their fine work in preparing the 2020 financial statements for the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba. These financial statements reflect the return for JFM's investment portfolio and the continued generosity of our JFM donors. Some highlights. The investment portfolio generated a return of 10.74% before fees compared to 15.34% in 2019. As well, the JFM received contributions of $3.8 million in 2020 versus $5.7 million in the previous year. Next slide, please. JFM's auditor, PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, provided an unqualified opinion on the 2020 financial statements as it did for 2019. This means that the statements are fairly and appropriately presented without any identified exceptions or qualifications. On behalf of the JFM board, I would like to welcome Travis Muir of PwC, who is in attendance today. Travis will be available to address any questions specifically for the auditor. Thank you to Travis and his team for conducting the 2020 audit. Next slide, please. First, let's review the statement of financial position. As of December 31st, 2020, the fair value of the investment portfolio was $145.5 million, $10.9 million greater than 2019, an increase of 8%. Capital assets have decreased because of the accelerated amortization of software, which is now amortized over 5 years instead of over 10 years as done previously. The fair value of the asset base was $148.1 million, an increase of 8% or $11 million over the previous year. Next slide, please. Let's now turn to the liabilities and net assets. The increase in grant commitments and distributions payable was primarily due to the increase of flow-through commitments of $604,000 and donor-designated distributions payable of $325,000. These vary from year to year and are based on donor activities. In 2020, the Foundation took advantage of the CEBA loan offered by the federal government, as noted under loans payable. This COVID loan allowed businesses to borrow $40,000 for operating expenses, of which only $30,000 is repayable if repaid by December 31, 2022. The encroachable funds payable was the market value of the contributions of two organizations who maintain beneficial ownership of their funds, subject to certain call notice provisions. Looking now at the net assets, we see that the operating fund has a $5 million surplus position at the end of 2020. This represents the net income for the year after reserve fund allocation. The 2020 surplus came entirely from unrealized gains in the portfolio and reflects the positive investment performance for the year. The reserve fund has now been allocated to its maximum level, equal to 2 years of distributions at a projected 4% per annum, or $9.9 million in total. This fund is a function of the board-mandated reserve fund policy to allocate 2 years of distributions for periods of adverse market conditions. The reserve fund level at the end of 2019 was $8.4 million. And as mentioned before, the contributed capital in the endowment funds has increased by $3.8 million, or 3%. Next slide, please. Next is the statement of operations. First, under revenues and direct costs of revenue, we see that the realized gross revenue of $7.6 million was $1.2 million less than in 2019, a decrease of 14%. This was primarily due to the realized gains on investments being $831,000 lower than in 2019, a reduction of 73%. Grant income normally includes just endowment distributions received from JFM USA as a flow-through of gifts from US donors, which was $53,500 in 2020. This year, it also included $16,500 received from the province of Manitoba's COVID Back to Work program. The $17,600 or 7% increase in custodial and investment fees was due to the growth in the market value of the portfolio from the previous year. Looking now under expenses, we see that in 2020, direct programming expenses were lower compared to 2019, with no cost recoveries this year, as a result of the cancellation of JFM's various events and programs due to COVID restrictions. Where possible, the canceled activities were replaced by virtual programming and promotional activities. Undesignated grant commitments were almost $58,000 higher than 2019, mainly due to the emergency COVID grants that were paid out by the JFM. The total for grant commitments in 2020 was just over $216,000 higher than the previous year, primarily due to organic growth in the designated funds. Next slide, please. In 2020, there was an unrealized gain of $6.4 million on investments compared to $9.9 million in 2019, which reflected the volatility in the markets. Lastly, the excess of revenues over expenses and commitments for the year of $6.2 million was $4.8 million lower than the $11 million in 2019, again due primarily to market volatility. In closing, I'd like to thank Ian Barnes for his assistance in preparing this presentation. Should you have any questions, please address them to the moderator using the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and they will be addressed following the adjournment of the meeting.
Dan, thank you very much. As you can see, despite COVID and all of the restrictions and the changes that came with it, 2020 was overall a very successful year for our foundation. May I please have a motion for the approval of the financial statements of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba for the year ended December 31, 2020.
I so move.
Thanks, Dan Blankstein. And may I have a seconder, please?
I'll second it, Richard.
Thank you, Sharon Gozer-Tritt. Are there any opposed? I see none. Motion carried. Thank you. The next agenda item is the appointment of our auditors for 2021, and may I please have a motion to appoint PricewaterhouseCoopers as the auditors of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba for the 2021 fiscal year ending December 31, 2021.
I will make that motion as stated.
Thanks, Dan. And a seconder, please.
I'll second that, Richard.
Thank you, Bonnie Cham. Are there any opposed? I see none opposed. Motion carried. Thank you very, very much. And we now come to my chair's report. As I sit here in my condo this year, not having set foot in the JFM offices since early 2020, other than during the shooting of the video that you're going to see in a few minutes, it's very difficult for me to reconcile that 2 years have gone by since I became board chair. But it has indeed been 2 years, and an interesting and unusual 2 years it has been. I'm going to start by recounting the conversations I had when I was asked to take on the position of board chair. One of the selling points that my predecessors, Anita Wurtzman and Eric Winograd, shared over a few coffee sessions is that the board chair position typically entails all kinds of lunches and dinners and speaking engagements. I believe the phrase well-oiled machine was thrown in a few times. Well, needless to say, the past 2 years were not typical. I've been asked a few times about the highlights of my term, and for me, I think there were 3 significant achievements. First, we conducted our search for our new CEO, And we did this without retaining an outside firm. Now, as those of you who have been involved in an organizationally led search will know, it is a lot of work and it takes many, many hours and many meetings. I had a great group working with me on the selection committee, and in February 2020, John Diamond took the helm as CEO of the JFM. Thank you, John, for everything you have done, and particularly in such unusual and trying circumstances. I want to mention also that in the interim period when we were without a CEO, Ian Barnes and Stephanie Kazar kept our foundation running seamlessly, and it was business as usual. I again want to thank both of you for your extraordinary efforts. The second significant achievement was the role of the board in overseeing the JFM COVID-19 Emergency Relief Program. I'm going to speak in more detail about that in just a moment, and we're going to share with you a short video about the impact on our community of the JFM COVID relief initiatives. The third important accomplishment has been the commencement of our strategic planning process. Our strategic plan of 2015 is no longer current, and as the duration and effects of COVID became clearer, we realized that we simply couldn't continue waiting for the end of COVID to begin the process of creating a new plan. So, using our online technology to assist with strategic planning sessions and discussion groups, we have undertaken a streamlined strategic planning initiative. The goal is to create a new business plan that will take us through the next 5 years and that will allow us to plan beyond that. This process has involved looking inward and seeking input from our board and staff, and looking outward and seeking input from the community. And we're now at the point where we will be reviewing the data that has been collected, and from that, creating our new plan. With the assistance of Factor Research, we conducted focus groups with members of our community to seek their input. And the focus groups have taught us new things about our community that will help us reach new segments of our community, particularly those that may have to this point been underrepresented and underengaged. One of the impacts of the pandemic and our inability to meet in person is that it has forced us to be flexible and open to new ways of doing things. For example, we've had to pivot away from the traditional events that have come to define the JFM, events that historically have helped us connect with our community and welcome new fund holders. Part of our action plan moving forward is to assess our traditional practices and our newly developed COVID practices and use the best of each. When I introduced the planning process to the board and staff, it was really a healthy opportunity to remind ourselves in the simplest terms what our foundation does and why we are here. And my position is that we have three functions. First, we connect with our community and we build support from prospective and current donors. Second, we manage the endowment funds that we are given the responsibility to steward. And third, we learn about our community and its needs, and we distribute funds accordingly through our grants. Last year at this time, we were laying out our plan for what would be the three phases of our COVID-19 response. Well, we've now completed all three phases, and at the conclusion of 2020, COVID-19 relief funding had reached $898,000. And this total continues to rise. In 2021, we continue to accept applications for funding relating to the pandemic, and we will do so until our community has recovered. I'm extremely proud to be able to report that our quick and flexible response to the COVID-19 pandemic has shown that the JFM has been an effective, strong, compassionate, and impactful resource to our community. I think this is the moment when Drew Unger is going to share with you a short video that we prepared a few months ago. And when I look at the registration list, I think a few of my co-stars are actually out in the audience, so enjoy.
My name is John Diamond, and I'm the CEO of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba. I began my tenure in February of 2020, and 6 weeks later, the world shut down.
So it was March 13th of 2020 when we had our very last program that was live on site in Gwen sector. It was scary. It was unknown. We didn't know what was going to happen next.
When COVID first hit in March of 2020, a lot of uncertainties were presenting themselves in the community generally and specifically for JCFS.
We realized when the pandemic hit that we had organizations that were reliant on us and we needed to help them. We realized that we had to make sure that our organizations could sustain themselves.
So we were definitely concerned about how we would be able to continue to operate. I was definitely concerned because I did really make a pledge to my staff that I was going to do everything that I could to make sure they had a job.
Making sure people had food, making sure people had shelter. These were primary things that we wanted to help support. The board, to their credit, all came together and said, we provide funds for 31 Jewish organizations in the province of Manitoba, and we are going to send checks to each and every one of them, no questions asked.
It allowed organizations to survive. Some of the organizations used the money, I think, to pay their rent, to pay their mortgages, to fix roofs that were leaking. The organizations were surprised to open an envelope and find a check without having gone through the application process. They were surprised, they were thrilled, we received letters of thanks, and it was terrific.
The first check came in the mail late spring. I couldn't get to the bank fast enough. The majority of those dollars went to the meal program that we designed for isolated seniors. When we first closed down and spoke to a lot of our members, the biggest concern was food security.
When JCFS received that unsolicited check, it came so quickly. What the foundation's funds were able to do was purchase the technology needed to get our staff working remotely immediately and get them servicing our clients, especially the isolated clients, the seniors who couldn't go out and do things for themselves.
We divided up the funds that we had available into 3 separate tranches. So the first tranche we said, let's get it out the door right now, make sure that people have the monies to keep the doors open.
For the second and third tranches, we decided that the organizations would apply as usual, but it was COVID relief funding. That was our priority. The total amount in 2020 was around $700,000, and I think was about $300,000 in the first tranche, and then second and third tranches were about $200,000 each.
The foundation support in the time of crisis is so comforting and so helpful. The dollars that kept coming for COVID relief have been a huge support to be able to contact somebody, to be able to have these open discussions about how they can help and why we need the help. And the fact that they turn around in a very quick time frame to be able to support the seniors is very, very important.
The foundation is extremely proactive. It's thinking about its beneficiary agencies all the time, and it's thinking about them with the speed with which they need to respond. The fact that there were no delays there, I think, was the critical thing in making the foundation a real partner with all of its benefactor agencies.
I think we've learned from this experience that the foundation is key to the sustenance of the Manitoba Jewish community. We have to make sure going forward that we are positioned to act quickly and to be flexible.
Well, popcorn down, and I'm now going to spend just a few minutes with a snapshot of the highlights and milestones of 2020. We distributed roughly $5.4 million to programs and services that benefit the Jewish community, as well as Manitobans of all backgrounds. We distributed over $898,000 to community organizations and COVID-19 relief funding. Distributions this year from organization endowment funds reached $1,278,000 to 30 Jewish charitable organizations. Over the past 5 years, this total has increased by 90%. We saw 55 new funds opened in 2020, including 7 Bar Bat Mitzvah funds and 5 Women's Endowment funds. Our Women's Endowment Fund saw $74,940 distributed to support organizations providing care and support for women and children in need. 77 students in our community received scholarships amounting to over $175,000. And this year, 6 new community members became Endowment Book of Life signers. Sherry Cohn, Toby Morantz, Adam Nippon, Laura Richmond, Lottie Tartell, and Sandy Tapper each generously made a commitment to leave a lasting legacy in our Jewish community through their stories and planned endowment contributions. Finally, as it became clear that the pandemic was affecting our portfolio returns, we realized that it was prudent and necessary for us to reduce the annual distribution rate from 4.2% to 4%. This reduction was implemented retroactively to January the 1st, 2020, and it's reflected in this year's distribution. Our Jewish community's longevity and prosperity remain our foremost and our perpetual responsibility, and I can assure you that this step was taken only after the greatest deliberation. All of this information and more is in the JFM 2020 annual report. All attendees here will receive a digital copy via email later this week, and the physical annual report will be part of a general community mailing happening later in the month. It is now my great pleasure to acknowledge 3 new employees at the JFM who joined us since our last meeting: Pamela Johnson, Administrative Associate, Josh Kerr, Marketing and Events Associate, and Tracy Price, Executive Assistant. To all 3 of you, welcome, and I am looking forward to actually meeting you in person. Our 3 new staff members join our other hardworking and devoted staff at the JFM, and I want to name each one of them: John Diamond, CEO, Marla Arnovich, Director of Operations and Grants, Ian Barnes, Chief Financial Officer, Patty Boorman, Director of Administration, Stephanie Kazar, Director of Development and Gift Planning, Marcia Cowan, Strategic Development Specialist, Jocelyn Dyson, Administrative Associate, Laurel Hogan, Donor Development Associate, Linda Joyal, Accountant, Pamela Minuk, Donor Relations Associate, Drew Unger, Director of Marketing and Communications, Jennifer Wood, Manager of Information Technology. And a huge thank you to all of you from me and from the entire board of the JFM. I now am going to proceed to the next agenda item, which is the Governance Committee Bylaw Amendment Report, and I'm going to call on Sean Shore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the Governance Committee Bylaw Amendment Report. On April 7th, 2021, the Board of Directors passed a motion approving amendments to the bylaws of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba. For the most part, these amendments are of a housekeeping nature and are in keeping with generally accepted best practices of governance. The amendments allow for virtual meetings, allow slightly more flexibility in board terms, and separate out the Governance Committee from the Nominating Committee. Anyone interested in seeing a copy of the bylaw provisions can contact the Foundation, and we'd be happy to provide those to you. I would now ask for a motion to approve and ratify the amended bylaws, please.
And Sean, are you prepared to make that motion, please?
I am.
Thank you, Sean. And may I ask for a seconder, please?
I will second it.
Thank you, Jeff Lieberman. Are there any opposed? I see none. The motion is passed. Sean, thanks again, and thank you for your hard work and all the behind the scenes effort. I would now like to welcome Eric Winograd, past chair, to deliver the 2020 nominating committee report. Eric?
Eric, I'm sorry, you're on mute.
And I thought I was doing so well.
Eric,
Okay.
you were doing beautifully, and I have in my script a comment about how terrific you are. You have become at Zoom. I now have to delete that.
Yes, I know. And you know why? Because I actually thought I've been so quiet this whole time because I thought I was live mic. Anyway, hello, everybody. The nominating subcommittee for 2021 was comprised of myself as chair, Dan Blankstein, Bonnie Cham, Jeff Lieberman, and Richard Yaffe. The following board members tendered their resignations effective June 16th, 2021. We thank each of you for the diligence and conscientiousness they have shown to the JFM. Becky Kaufman, Sean Shore, and Yael Silver. Jeff Norton and I have completed our full terms on the board as of June 16th, 2021. I retire as our past chair. The nominating committee recommends that the following 4 people be elected to the board for their first 4-year term. Lainey Bocout, Laura Diamond, Daniel Levin, and Daphne Shore. These are 4 very impressive and very engaged individuals, each bringing unique skills to the board of the foundation. Thank you for agreeing to serve, and we look forward to working with you. The following members have not yet completed their terms and are continuing to serve the board. Bonnie Cham, Sharon Gozier-Tritt, Stephen Hyman, Jeff Lieberman, and Alex Zarembnitsky. The nominating committee also recommends that the following board members be elected for a second 4-year term. Dan Blankstein, Caroline Kiva, and Yuri Kraut. The nominating committee also recommends that Frida Steele be elected to serve 1 additional year. And finally, the nominating committee confirms that Richard Yaffe will continue as a voting member of the board in the capacity of past chair in accordance with the bylaws. And now I would like to move that the slate of board members being elected this evening, as I've outlined, be elected to the board of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba.
Thanks very much, Eric. We have a motion, and I will now ask for a seconder, please.
I will second that, please.
Thank you, Becky Kaufman. Are there any opposed? I see none. Motion passed. Eric, back to you.
In addition to the elected individual, there is 1 non-voting member appointed by the Jewish Federation of Winnipeg. Gustavo Zettner from the Jewish will be our Jewish Federation rep.
Thanks, Eric. So to summarize then, the board of directors of our Jewish Foundation for the 2021 year is as follows. Dan Blankstein, Lainey Bocout, Bonnie Cham, Laura Diamond, Sharon Gozier-Tritt, Stephen Hyman, Daniel Levin, Jeff Lieberman, Caroline Kiva, Yuri Kraut, Alex Zarembnitsky, Daphne Shore, Frida Steele, Richard Yaffe, and Gustavo Zettner. Gustavo, I'm not used to not being the last person alphabetically. Before I turn over the microphone to Bonnie Cham, I want to offer my profound thanks to our outgoing board members for your dedication and hard work, particularly in a difficult and demanding time. I especially want to pay my own personal tribute to my friend Eric Winograd. Eric has served our foundation for over 20 years. He knows everything and everybody in the Jewish community. He has served the Jewish community of Winnipeg tirelessly. Eric, thank you for your many hard years of dedication and devotion. You've always been ready, willing, and able to serve and to assist when needed and in whatever capacity was needed. And I know I speak for all of us on the board when I also thank you for learning how to navigate Zoom. Not perfect this evening, but you have been a good sport. And I would now like to welcome Bonnie Cham, incoming chair.
Thank you very much, Richard. On behalf of the board of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba, it's my honor tonight to be able to say a few words about Richard's tenure with the organization. Richard has spent time on the board for almost a decade, actively participating in and chairing numerous committees. He knows our community and understands the JFM's place in it. A true leader and mentor for both the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba family and the community. A quick look at his time on the board shows just how integral he has been. So Richard joined the board of directors in 2013, and he served as a member and subsequently chair of the JFM Governance and Nominating Committee and led a significant redrafting of our bylaw to align with the recommendations following the board retreat in 2015. He served as a member and chair of the JFM Special Grants Committee, and he became chair of the board in 2019. And during his tenure as chair, he served as chair of the 2020 CEO Selection Committee, attended many meetings regarding the COVID-19 relief effort, and participated in the 2020 strategic refresh. Of course, none of his experience could have fully prepared him to be chair of the board during a pandemic. Chairing the board at this time required the development of special skills, such as talking to your screen during a Zoom meeting without the normal feedback cues you get by being able to assess the reaction of others around a boardroom table, reminding others to unmute, and playing a version of Hollywood Squares at times to ensure that all attendees at a meeting had a chance to voice their opinions. This required a special type of leadership, which Richard really exemplified during the final 15 months of his chairmanship. I'd like to take this opportunity to publicly thank you for all you have done and for the mentorship you have extended to me as I prepare to become the chair of the board of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba. So thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you, Bonnie, for those very kind words and your generosity. It has been an honor to work with all of you, and it's been an honor to serve the foundation as chair. I just want to point out that I was delighted to open a package finally this morning. John Diamond delivered it yesterday morning, but I didn't have an opportunity. And I received a beautiful, beautiful JFM tie. It's really very beautiful. And this plaque, which is inscribed Jewish Foundation of Manitoba and my name, and it gives the years as board member and as board chair dated today. So thank you all. I have every confidence that the JFM is in extremely capable hands with Bonnie Cham sitting in the board chair role. And I want to add that there is a certain symmetry in Bonnie's succeeding me. Many, many, many years ago, I was taught by a wonderful teacher for grades 4, 5, and 6 as a student in the major work program that was then offered to certain students in Winnipeg. The late Eve Gozer, who was the aunt of our wonderful board member Sharon Gozer-Tritt, taught me for those 3 years. I later learned from Bonnie that Mrs. Gozer taught her for the following 3 years in the major work program. So the succession seems so natural many years later. Bonnie, I wish you every success. As I've mentioned, we have some board members who are retiring this year. Each of you, in your own way, has been an absolutely integral part of our foundation. We want to thank you for your generosity, your knowledge, your leadership, and your hard work. Our most sincere thanks to Becky Kaufman, Jeff Norton, Sean Shore, and Yael Silver. Jeff did an absolutely superb job at chairing our investment committee for many years. He has mentored Yuri in that role. And Jeff, we owe you such a huge debt of gratitude. You are the definition of a great board member. Sean chaired governance and nominating. He was key in our recent governance reviews and bylaw updates, and has worked very closely with me in overseeing the revisions to our bylaws. Becky has been an ardent JFM volunteer for ages. She has been a member of the Women's Endowment Fund Committee, the Distributions Committee, and the Development and Gift Planning Committee. Becky loves giving away money. And Becky generously became an Endowment Book of Life signer in 2021. Becky, thank you so much, and we all wish you the very best. And Yael, of course, was an important member of our Audit and Finance Committee. I also want to thank the wonderful Josh Blatt, who has sat as the Federation appointee on our board for the past few years. Josh was keenly involved in all of our board and planning work, and we are very grateful to him and to Federation. And here we are at the end of our AGM. I would now ask for a motion to adjourn the annual general meeting, please.
I'll motion it.
Thank you. I think that was Yuri.
Yes.
Thank you, Yuri Kraut. And I declare the meeting adjourned. Once again, thank you to all of you for attending. We've all spent so much of the last year on Zoom, and we appreciate your spending an almost summer evening with us tonight.